Well, there'll be thousands of farmers across this country that will know my guest here today, partly because they will have seen him at FCC forums in the past, and of course millions of Canadians know Dave Chilton from The Wealthy Barber, the best-selling book. How do you categorize that now, by the way? Best-selling book?
Yeah, people have said
of
it.
Your time.
Yeah, they've said that. I don't know how you prove that, but I say it anyway.
Okay.
Without the proof, I now just go ahead and say it because others have. So I'm glad it did so well. I was a bit lucky, frankly, but I'm glad it worked out.
So 2 million copies of The Wealthy Barber, an amazing success story. Maybe people would be interested to know why you called it The Wealthy Barber.
Well, you know, I started out as the wealthy bartender. I wanted to move it into a fictional setting and wrap it in humor and use conversation and get away from charts and graphs. I went with the bartender thinking that we often do get advice from bartenders. It makes no sense. And on a Thursday afternoon, I remember it vividly, I switched it over to the barber shop. And the funny thing is I outlined the book in pretty significant detail. I never deviated in the year-long writing process from the outline. I knew exactly what I wanted to say, the order I wanted to say it in, and I think that helped in the flow. And then my father and sister got involved in the editing. They do that for a living. In my sister's case, my dad has great language skills. So I was lucky to be able to tap into them inexpensively and kind of go from there, and the rest is history. And it really was luck. Interest rates declined precipitously, which helped. People were forced to learn about alternative products to GICs. The demographics were on side. The baby boomers were starting to save. The financial institutions were looking for educational materials. Kind of everything that could have gone right went right. I was very lucky.
So a couple of years ago, the book is selling well, and you decide to take it off the shelf.
That was a strange move.
And then you write another book, this one called The Return of the Wealthy Barber.
Well, the two are totally unrelated, by the way. Interestingly, I pulled the first book long before I thought about writing the second one, and I can't even explain why I pulled the first book. I mean, it was literally a quick decision on a Sunday night. The book was still doing well. I felt it needed a fairly significant updating to take into account things like TFSAs and ETFs, and I thought, I'm not sure I want to go back and rewrite it. Text-heavy books aren't doing as well now when we have this attention deficit disorder society, but there was something about retiring it when it was still doing well that was very appealing to me. I liked it going out when it was still selling, and I also thought the 20-year anniversary was approaching, but I didn't give this a lot of thought. I'll be the first to admit. In fact, I just kind of outlined my whole 5 minutes worth of thinking. I called Maureen at the office and I said, we're going to pull The Wealthy Barber. I'm not even going to print it again. Well, Chapters, of course, and a couple other suppliers went crazy and said, that's nuts. You've at least got to give us one more print run to wind down. I did, but I've never deviated from that decision. I've never changed my mind, and I've never thought about changing my mind. Even now, with the second book doing well and people saying, can you bring the first one back out? I said, no, you know what, I'm glad it's retired. I'm thrilled it did well. But I like the second book better myself. I mean, obviously everybody's got a different perspective, but I'm glad it's doing so well too.
Agriculture is in a position right now where, even though the economy is volatile, the future of agriculture is looking pretty strong. And the temptation is to, if I'm a farmer, to continue to plow back all of my profits into the farm. Just from an investment perspective, what's your take on that? Is that a good approach?
Well, you know, obviously you don't want to have all your assets tied up or all your money tied up in one asset. I mean, it's poor diversification, but by the same token, you have to be realistic. You know, the farming business takes a lot of capital. And, you know, when times are good, it's a great opportunity to reinvest in everything from machinery to more land and everything else. So it's easy for us as non-farmers to sit back and say, hey, you've got to have a more diversified approach. But when you're actually running the farm, there's always capital needs, and the return on investment can be relatively good if you know what you're doing. And so it's hard to be critical, but in general, your point's a good one. You've got to still diversify and build a retirement savings plan up and do all those types of things. One thing I find a lot of farmers are very good at is paying down their non-deductible debt as they invest money. Now, obviously, a lot of their debt's deductible because they're borrowing for farming reasons, and oftentimes with FCC involved. But when they have a non-deductible mortgage, for example, they're very good at paying it down. And you know, in general, farmers are actually quite good with their money, interestingly. They don't tend to live beyond their means. They tend to buy homes they can truly afford, often obviously on the farm. I looked at a lot of farmers' financial plans throughout the years and been quite impressed. In fact, the last chapter of The Wealthy Barber Returns is only 2.5 pages long, 2 pages long, and it's my favorite chapter in the book. And it's a story of 20 years ago when a farmer came to see me and he said, here's my financial plan. And he could tell me the whole thing in 7 sentences. To this day, it's one of the best financial plans I've seen. So I think that a lot of farmers intuitively use the common sense measures quite well. I was saying to you before we started taping that I think one of the reasons I've gone over well with farmers over the years is they don't like any bull. And so I go up there and tend to be pretty truthful about everything and just say, here's the common sense, here are the things you have to do. And they like that kind of message. They don't believe in the get rich quick, and for good reason, it doesn't work.
In The Wealthy Barber, the first book, you talked a lot about mutual funds, and I think you talk about it in the new book as well. Has your opinion of mutual funds changed much in 20 years?
Yeah, on two fronts it really has. You know, number one is that I think the ability that we don't have to pick the future mutual fund winners has been very much at evidence. It's just so difficult to do. The vast majority of actively managed money products have to outperform the averages. It's basic math. We can't all be above average. I mean, if you outperform, I have to underperform. We're going to be zero-sum game in terms of outperformance. And you throw costs in, most of us are going to underperform. So the question is, can you buck the odds here and pick the future winners? There's no indication to say any of us can. So that part of it's changed. That's why I think more people should use low-cost index products. But the other issue is Canadian costs for mutual funds have not come down. Even though we've brought so much more in the way of assets, for the most part, costs have stayed stubbornly high. And we cannot afford to pay 2 and 3% a year to have our money managed. Now, embedded in that 2 and 3% cost is often an advisor. And if he or she is giving you good advice, that 100 basis points, that 1% may be justified. But again, if you're paying a combination of 2 and 3%, especially in this market environment, with artificially low interest rates, less than the inflation rate, with mutual funds struggling with market struggles, it is tough to justify that. So I think you're going to see a lot of pressure on the industry to bring costs down. Consumers are becoming more educated. There's more competing products. We'll all win over the next 5 to 10 years. But this is a tough investment arena right now, I'll tell you. Holy smokes. Like, it is not fun. Who knows where to put money right now? There's nothing that's done well. But I do want to bring up something you said off air. I never give specific investment advice ever. Right. I tend to teach more than anything. But when I toured with FCC, did I or did I not say gold? And I even said on stage how unusual it was for me to say that. I said I don't normally do this. But gold was at $700 to $800 when we were touring, and I said, if you look at the world situation, the amount of debt out there relative to GDPs in the developed world, we are in huge trouble. It's grade 3 arithmetic. It's not complex macroeconomics. I'm still very worried about it. At least they're going to try to print a tremendous amount of money to get through this. And once you see currencies racing to the bottom and in essence intentionally trying to devalue, gold almost has to be the winner. And at that level, I felt very comfortable saying it would do well. Now that it's up $1,700, $1,800, it's much more difficult to say. Your guess is as good as mine, frankly. A lot of that news is factored into the price. But at that particular point, I thought it was very good. So I'm going to retire on the prediction front, one for one. Farmers will always think, there's the guy that was never wrong about future predictions. I will never screw that track record up.
Right. And I should have bought gold.
Yeah, you should have.
Appreciate it. Thanks.